Is all armed and ready? Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? No. Yes? No? What's that? No questions? Okay. So, Virupa, maybe I'll read. Now, the thing is that today we are still in India in a way, but yet in the beginning of the Book of the Dead, we're introducing Tibet and its history. And in a way, that brings to the topic the connection between India and Tibet and why we call it, for example, why this course is called Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies. There have been complaints among scholars. Well, how come there's no Indo-Chinese? How come no Indo-Japanese? How come no Indo-Korean? Well, of course, some Tibetans in its history have tried to say, well, Buddhism is our thing, we're the central country, which after Indian Buddhism is destroyed, in a way they are. But basically, the larger purpose in Tibet has been to preserve the Indian tradition as it was. And they're totally into that. And you know, in Nalanda Monastery, in Vikramashila Monastery, they had Tibetan houses, an actual college, where the Tibetans would come and stay. It would be like there would be an American college at Oxford, you know, where the Americans were really trying to preserve the English thing, which we don't have, but we do actually, very Anglo sort of thing, some parts of America. But on the other hand, we rebelled against them type thing, right, supposedly. And we broke free of the empire. We supposedly are the first people to get liberated from the empire, supposedly. So I don't want to digress about my thoughts about that. But point is, the Tibetans are consciously trying to preserve, and the big monasteries have the curriculum of Nalanda Monastery, monastic university, and Vikramashila, and the other great Indian monastic universities. And then there's this issue of the verbal oral traditions and the yogic traditions, which all interwove with the monastery like advanced study. And so that's where we are. So I want to read. I'm going to start by just reading a story from the Daomen Masters of Mahamudra, because we're still sort of in the trajectory of the course. We're still in India. When you deal with Tantra, you're dealing with what was discovered and what was used, what was implemented in India in the last 5 centuries of the time in India. Remember, in the beginning of this, which you read a long time ago, there's this thing on pages 17 and 18, as I recall, or 16 and 17, about the vehicles or styles of Buddhism in India. You know, the individualistic style, the universalistic style, and the apocalyptic style, as I call it, which is esoteric or magical Buddhism, you know, Tantra. And so here we're coming on page 17, under that, we call it, the style is socially culminatory. Monastic universities reach out beyond the literate state into marginal areas. Unpacks furthest implications of messianic style. In other words, sort of world-changing, but sort of outreach from the monasteries, you could sort of call it. It's represented in the famous story of Naropa. That, you know, do you know the story? You all know the story of Naropa by now. I don't know if I've told, but I should just tell that just in my own words quickly. Naropa was one of the, chancellor of Nalanda Monastic University. And the chancellor or the dean or the president was not in a big office, you know, doing fundraising. He was in the police box out at the gate. And the reason he was at the police box out at the gate was if any challenger came to the gate here at Columbia University and said, you people at Columbia University, your view of reality is all wrong, and you're just completely messed up, and I want to debate with you, and would challenge that person in the police box there to a debate, then summon the mayor and some, you know, the city council or some equivalent of, and then have a debate. And if the challenger won the debate, then they became the head of the university by winning the argument, in other words, theoretically. I mean, that was the Indian style. And the guy who was that had to become the student of that new person or leave. You know, so Naropa was one of those gatekeepers, that is to say, like the equivalent of the president, actually, of the college. And he wasn't challenged by an outside debater, but there was the lady who was cleaning his office, the cleaning lady. She was in sweeping way, you know, and he was reading something at his desk, you know, president's desk. And then she said, "Oh, hey, Sonny boy, what you reading there?" He says, "Oh, such and such a text, you know." And then she said, "Oh, do you understand it? Can you understand it?" He said, "Yes, yes." "The words?" She said. "Yes, I can understand the words. I can read it," he said. And then she said, "Do you understand the meaning?" And then he was a little hesitant. Then he said, "Yeah, I understand the meaning." And then she started crying. She burst into tears. So he said, "Well, excuse me, why are you crying?" And she said, "Well, because even the head scholar, you know, the president of the university, can tell a lie in saying you understand the meaning when you don't." This is the cleaning lady. So then he's like, "Oh, you know," and then he was honest enough to admit it. "Oh, don't cry, don't cry." "Yes, well, I was, you know, I feel I should say I should be understanding, meaning I don't really fully understand it." But he said, "Who does understand it?" He said. And she said, "Oh, my brother understands it," she said. "And well, who's your brother?" "Oh," she said, "his name is Tilopa." "Oh, where is he?" "Oh, he's far away somewhere in the jungle." "Oh, you couldn't even find him," she said. And he said, "Oh, well, I'd like to, but which direction?" And then she mentioned some place, you know, off in the jungle, and said, "Well, if you want to find him, you better at least say the Chakrasambhara root mantra 100,000 times on your way, in case you're interested." He said, "Oh, I'd like to see him." And then she says, "Oh, that's a good idea." And then she turned into light and flew out the window. Very Halloween story. So, and then he, you know, took off his like Harris tweed jacket, but no, it wasn't that. It wasn't a waspy Ivy League thing. He took over whatever he was wearing as the head of the monastic college and ran off into the jungle and eventually found Tilopa, who was his guru. And there's a whole long story about Tilopa teaching him more sort of the yogic siddha sort of thing. And but then what story is, and so this has been used as if the siddhas, the mahasiddhas, the tantric adepts, in other words, were anti-monastic. But that's not at all the case. And they never tell the story about where the monastery was challenged by someone from the Sankhya tradition who was a better debater. And then the monastery sent a word out to Naropa, "Please come back and defend us." And he rushed back to defend them from this guy who was going to like change their curriculum because they couldn't compete with him debate-wise. He was too sharp for them. But then when he got there to debate the guy, he started gagging and he couldn't speak. So then the guy's laughing at him. "Oh, you brought back the great Naropa to defend you, and like not only are you ignorant and you can't defeat me, but he can't even talk. Like, what did you bring him here for?" And then, so there's kind of an impasse there. And then Tilopa shows up, and Tilopa says, "Wait a minute. You think he can't talk, but actually he can easily defeat you. But he made a vow to me as his guru that he wouldn't engage in debating anymore once he started to do the tantric practices, you know, because it would be too overwhelming or something like that." And so I can just give him an exemption from his vow for this moment, and then you'll see. So then he did, and then Naropa started to speak, and instead of ordinary language, a kind of roar came out of his mouth, surprising he himself. And the other guy fainted and fell down, and they saved the monastery. So they don't tell that story about Naropa, like how he cared about the monastic university, and how the siddhas are sort of like advanced graduate studies, although some of the siddhas were monks and remained monks. So it isn't just a matter of a lot of them left like he, because you know the monk can't be involved in with you know. Females, you know, with the whole yogic male-female thing, could not be involved with that. So therefore, they had to leave. They had to resign their vow and so on. Some of them did, but mostly they didn't intend to. And most of the great writers and scholars of the Tantra, which has its own huge bunch of literature, remained monks actually. So, ideal of the Mahasiddha. That's what the Siddha means, one who has achieved, and the idea is it's kind of like a nirmanakaya of a Buddha, someone who has become perfect Buddha, but they return to their ordinary body, and then they, rather than sort of waiting in some celestial place and coming back as a 12-deed Buddha like Shakyamuni, and then they come back in their ordinary thing and they do whatever they can do for the society and for others in life. And that's a whole story which we'll look at when we look at the Book of the Dead. Anyway, female or male great adept, the psychonaut, as I call it, of Indian inner science, actual perfect Buddha maintaining ordinary human form in history, latent kingship of individual explicated ritually and artistically. So this is when Buddhism has been over 1,000 years working in Indian society, and it's now safe for someone to have this level of individualism without fearing being crushed down by some tyrannical king, who's the only person who gets initiated or, coronated in a more authoritarian society is the king, not some yogi or something. Whereas the yogis are doing like coronation ceremonies for themselves in the esoteric teaching, but it becomes more open in the last 500 years of Indian Buddhism. So then 3, non-dualism elucidated to include everything, including sexuality and death. Wisdom, compassion union becomes wisdom, bliss union, because in the Tantra reveals that compassion, for it to be genuine, it has to be based in bliss of the compassionate person. Because how can it become effective energy of trying to help another be free of suffering and to feel relief from that suffering if one hasn't experienced that oneself, the bliss of such freedom? Buddhahood as male-female sexual union, orgasmic reality. Apocalyptic insistence on accelerating history and evolution, that's what's the apocalyptic part about it. Apocalypse doesn't only mean, the book of Revelation and Jesus coming back and having World War III in favor of Jesus, and in favor of the Texas Southern Baptists, which is the thing about the rapture, in case you don't know about that. And so it doesn't just mean that. It means, apocalypse means revelation, a sort of immediate revelation, immediate sense of oneness with God and so forth, even in the West. It's Greek, apokalypto means the removal of the veil. And so the apocalyptic insistence on accelerating history and evolution, that means karma, the realization of individual Buddhahood and universal Buddhaverse, like in the Vimalakirti, here and now, in this lifetime, preferably through magical and high-tech means. Social result is elevation of women, comparatively. Not that anybody's ever really properly elevated them until just nowadays. We're within striking distance here in the US, even though they're pushing us backward. Expansion of culture to marginal low castes, tribals, aliens. Permeation of high culture with aesthetic values. Loosening of rigidities, living beyond this life identities, unilateral disarmament, which happened in every country where Buddhism unfolded these 3 styles, and the 3rd style, where it no longer becomes interesting to be a warrior and conquer others, but rather to conquer your own inner, inadequacy is the main point in life, and therefore the main thing that society supports. And they become vulnerable, therefore, politically, and they did, starting with Shakyamuni's own kingdom, actually, where it was conquered by others, another city-state, during his own life, actually, because he took too many people joined his mendicant movement, and they were not well defended. Same happened in Tibet, same happened in Mongolia. Same happened in India later as a whole, and then both in Tibet and Mongolia. Spreads everywhere, monastic and messianic styles spread, because they support the monastic and the messianic style, because this is like advanced practice, it's not alternative practice. Though in subtle streams reaching farther to Indonesia, Korea, Japan, and Tibet, uniquely kept in total integration with the 2 previous styles in Tibet and later Mongolia. So that framework is what you want to look at in the 3rd wave of, you could say, of Indian Buddhism, which is really where we still are. So let me read about Virupa, who is one of the great Mahasiddhas. So he has a verse at the beginning of this. Each one of these 84 Mahasiddha stories has a verse, and then a story, and then some other thing, So although I'll have to abbreviate, it's too long. Mine is the spontaneous reality disposed by the magnificent symbol, which means the Mahamudra, the great seal, literally. But it doesn't mean the seal that holds the ball on its nose in the Central Park Zoo. It means seal in the sense of a seal. Like, in wax you place a seal and it creates like a 3-dimensional stamp on the thing. And the Great Seal is where you have an experience of all of relative reality as if it were a blissful embrace, is what it means. Where great bliss and emptiness press themselves together and everything is seen as like that. That's actually what it means. I don't know, magnificent symbol. I don't agree with that translation particularly, but I understand what he's trying to say. Just abiding in things as they are, not thinking, not achieving, no self, saved from the pit of nihilism by self-aware existential experience, saved from the heavens of eternalism by absolute detachment. This reality is consummation of perfect awareness and pure delight. So bliss void, indivisible, that means, wisdom, bliss, indivisible. When King Devapala was reigning over the ancient empire of Bengal, Virupa was born in the eastern province of Tripura. Early in his life, he was ordained, that would be in Bangladesh nowadays. Early in his life, he was ordained as a Buddhist monk in the great monastic academy of Somapuri, where he joined over 1,000 monks in their study and meditation. While he was still young, Virupa was granted the initiation and empowerment of the Dakini Vajra Varahi, the sow-faced Dakini. Constantly striving for results from his meditation, he recited Vajra Varahi's mantra 10 million times, and then again 10 million over a 12-year period. But he did not receive so much as a dream omen to signify progress, and his mind was troubled. One day he became so depressed that he threw his rosary into a latrine. What do beads have to do with happiness, he asked himself. In the evening of that auspicious day, at the time of evening worship, just as the realization came to him that he had no rosary, a Dakini appeared and put his rosary back into his hand. She then gave him this advice in a vision. Most fortunate child, do not be troubled. With my blessing, continue your practice. Rid your mind of the habit of thinking things as either this or that, and abandon all wandering and critical thought. Strip your mind of mental fictions. Then there's a verse. The innate purity that is the nature of mind, that is the essential Vajra Varahi. She exists within, so do not look elsewhere. That is foolish and childish. The nature of the mind, elsewhere, that is foolish and childish. The nature of mind, a wish-fulfilling gem, stripped of all mental fiction, that is the most satisfying achievement. Virupa practiced the spiritual discipline of Vajra Varahi for a further 12 years, and he gained the supreme realization of Mahamudra, that means the Great Seal. Since he had thus attained power over life and death, he became accustomed to drink alcohol and to eat the meat that his servants brought and cooked for him. One day his servants caught some pigeons that roosted in the monastery, wrung their necks, and prepared them for the table. Noticing that the pigeons had disappeared, an observant monk rang the bell that called an assembly. "Which one of us priests has been eating pigeons?" he cried. "Surely none of us would kill pigeons," replied the venerable monks who had assembled. "Such a thing is unthinkable." During the subsequent cell-to-cell search, a monk peering in through Virupa's window saw him sitting down to a meal of pigeon pie and wine. A horrible guy, really. Terrible. In further assembly, the monks ordained that Virupa should be expelled from the monastery. Virupa took off his religious habit, and together with his begging bowl, he laid it before the image of the Buddha in the monastery temple. For the final time, he prostrated before the Buddha he had worshipped for more than 24 years and then left. At the monastery gate, he was stopped by a monk who asked him where he was bound. "Well, you have expelled me from the monastery," replied Virupa. "I follow the road that can provide for me." Close by the monastery of Somapuri was a large lake, and the surface of the lake was covered with lotus leaves. Approaching the lake, Virupa placed one foot upon a leaf, and seeing that it did not submerge, he set off across the lake, flitting from one leaf to the next, and with the name of Buddha on his lips, he reached the other shore. When the inmates of Somapuri saw this miracle, they were filled with remorse. They came to Virupa and prostrated before him, touching his feet with the deepest devotion. "But why did you kill our pigeons?" they humbly asked. "It was an illusion like all temporal phenomena," replied the master. He instructed his servants to bring him the pieces of pigeon wing, and then holding them aloft, he snapped his fingers, and the pigeons came to life and flew away, bigger and better than before. This miracle was observed by all present. Thus Virupa abandoned the life of a monk and became a yogin. He performed his next miracle on the banks of the river Ganges. So he did different things, and then this is the more famous one. In the town of Kanasata, Virupa entered a tavern. His hostess served him a flagon of alcohol and a plate of rice, which he vastly enjoyed. Then he demanded more to drink, then more and more, until the tavern was dry. When the hostess asked him to settle his bill, he pledged her the sun, thrusting his magical dagger, the purba, or really it's like a stake, it's not really a dagger, it has a triple blade, It's not like a knife. It has a triple cornered blade. But it's like a stake, like marking territory, which he vastly enjoyed. Then he demanded more to drink, and then more and more. Oh yeah, it's purba between light and shade, transfixing the sun in the sky. For the next 2.5 days, Virupa continued drinking, consuming 500 elephant loads of spirits. By this time, the king of Kanasata, unaware of Virupa's presence, was terrified. His ministers were helpless, unable to discover the cause of this disaster to their country. Finally, the sun goddess herself appeared to the king in a dream, revealing that it was Virupa's debt to a woman in a tavern that bound her. The king paid the debt, and Virupa vanished. So there's the famous picture of Virupa. He's sitting like a yogi, and he's going like this with one hand, while he's drinking with the other, and then he's stopping the sun, and so it can't set. So then drought is afflicting the country, and terrible things are going on, while he's gobbling more and more alcohol. So then he does a whole bunch of other stuff. And this is kind of Siddha things. And then Virupa left behind him these autobiographical verses. In the great monastic academy of Somapuri, I was ordained and lived a life of quiet discipline. By the virtue of my past actions, a divine emanation bestowed upon me initiation, blessing, and precepts. But I practiced my instruction with a deluded mind, and for 12 years, yes, 12, I lacked even a dream omen. Finally, bored, I threw my rosary into a latrine with a curse. But a Dakini vouchsafed me a vision of instruction which gave me new strength, and I carried on to realize the intrinsic perfection of the wheel of life. Then, after training myself in the yoga of a thought-free mind, the Somapuri monks of the Mahasangika order, utterly deluded, expelled me from the monastery. And in order to dispel their misconception, I entered a trance and walked upon water. I turned back to Ganges and ate forbidden fruit. I pledged the sun as my troth and indulged my senses. I cracked the Brahmin's image and reduced their pride. And after I had converted the witches of Devi Kota, Mahadeva recognized my many powers and qualities, creating a city to make offerings to honor me. If you cannot believe these stories of mine, why respect the Buddha's Dharma? Virupa lived for 700 years, and then finally he attained the ultimate liberation in the Dakini's paradise. So that's just a typical. He's especially considered kind of a spiritual ancestor of the Sakya order, one of the 4 main Tibetan Buddhist orders. They particularly like Virupa, and others but like other people. Naropa and Tilopa are very important too. So that's a typical Indian Siddha story. My favorite among those, that I'll just tell you in my own words, not to waste more time, is one I think called Kadgapa, I think. And he was found by Nagarjuna, I think, lying in a charnel ground, quite fat and happy looking, but lying there amongst the bodies. Charnel ground in India was like where they would just expose the bodies, except for where wealthy people who they would burn. But otherwise they would just throw the bodies there, and jackals would come and vultures and things, and that was the way they would dispose of bodies in those days. And so he was lying there with nice clothes, well dressed, and healthy looking, and sort of snoozing but weeping. So then Nagarjuna asked him, well, why are you weeping? And he said, well, my problem is I only like to sleep. That's all I do. And my family is sick of me, and they kicked me out finally, my wife and my mother and everyone. And they've just said, if you're going to be deadpan, like sleeping all day long, except when you get up to defecate or eat something, then we're going to just put you in the cemetery, like forget about it. Thinking to rouse me that way, but I'm sorry, that's all I want to do is sleep, so I'm staying here. But then I'm crying because no one's taking care of me. So then Nagarjuna initiated him into a certain tantric thing and taught him, Hevajra, I think, one of the tantric archetype deity patterns or templates, and sort of triumphal, sort of like Shiva Nataraja, if you're familiar with that. Today I couldn't bring my PowerPoint because I left my wire somewhere. So I'll show you on Thursday. I hope to get one back by then. But anyway, Hevajra looks like dancing Shiva, like that, with like this, and he has many arms and so forth. Very triumphal sort of looking figure. And but within the Hevajra Mandala, he taught him to merge the clear light of sleep with the clear light of death with the clear light of Buddhahood. These 3 different types of clear light, which means the ground energy of reality. And so he said, because he said, would you like a yoga that you can practice while sleeping and you can become a Buddha through sleeping. And I said, oh yeah, that's just what I want. So then he slept for 12 years, and occasionally his wife or relatives would come out to see what happened. Did he die? And they noticed he was just fine looking. And then they sneaked out at night and they saw that all these kind of like dakinis or angels had brought him food and nectar, and he was eating grapes, and he was like all happy in a sort of dreamlike state, and they didn't dare interfere. And then after 12 years, his sleeping body started floating around town, and without waking up, he started teaching everybody the Dharma, and he became like a siddha, an adept. So I really love that, how to sleep your way to Buddhahood, you know. And here's my favorite, but that's like favorite, because in sleep, you know, as you saw in the first, those of you who read that, you saw in the first part of the Book of the Dead those tables, and one of the table is the paralleling of sleep, dream, and waking with the three bodies of Buddhahood, right? You saw that table in chapter 2, I think, or the science of where is that table? Yeah, here. No, not quite there. Yeah, here on page 33. Truth body, beatific body, and emanation body, right? The supposed three bodies of Buddha. In the Mahayana, which in Tantrayana, death, the between, and life are parallel with that. And then sleep state, dream state, and waking state are parallel to those three. And then waking trance, waking magic body, and waking gross body. And those are the yogic ways of rehearsing the death process. That in waking trance is like death, because the yogin, according to their claim. Now, someone asked in one of the questions, which I answered a little bit, how can this be called science anyway? It's, you know, and I'm sure in their mind there was the idea that, you know, science involves materialism, because that's what modern science does. It operates under the dogma of materialistic reductionism, and there's no mind. Mind is not allowed to be part of the thing, because mind cannot be demonstrated. Mental states cannot be demonstrated to other. Only psychology became behaviorist, you know, and then now it's all back into neuroscience or the brain states, because they want to reduce it to something physical, because that's just a dogma. So therefore, something that insists that there is such a thing as mind is considered not science. But that's not necessary to the definition of science. If science means the attempt to systematically and experimentally discover the nature of reality, then there's an internal way of doing that, is the claim. And in India, in ancient India, and the king actually, or queen of the sciences, was said to be inner science, with Adhyatma Vidya, and because the most important thing in life is your state of mind. That's the most important thing. Your physical condition is very important, but you can manage your different kinds of physical decision best if your mind is regulated in a certain way and a little bit under your control, and you can make the best of whatever, even difficulties, and you don't get carried away by positive things and go crazy. And so, you know, from ancient time, you know, like in Shantideva's famous verse, you know, if you don't like stepping on sharp things as you walk around barefoot in the earth, you can cover the earth with leather, or the whole earth, surface of the earth, like a softball, or you can wear a pair of sandals. Those are the two things. So since your mind is where you react to whatever happens to you, if you're including death, actually, including sickness, including old age, including whatever it is, what we normally consider suffering, then you can manage it. You know, whereas if your mind can't handle anything, the slightest bit worrisome, then you're going to really be running away from everything. So that's sort of an ancient decision made in ancient India. And therefore, in that light, the inner science, or the mind science, how to regulate the mind, how to be in control of the mind, was the key science, actually. But how to understand it first, and then through understanding it, control it. Okay, so the waking trance is where the yogin goes into a death-like state, in the sense that they become aware of the mind in the body, that they can put the body into what is called cataleptic trance, sort of like a hibernation type of state. Then they can arise in a dream, lucidly, dreamlike condition, with a magic body, what's it is called. And then when they come out of that trance and go back into their regular body, to inhabit their regular body, they have what's called the waking gross body, which then is seen by them as the emanation body of a Buddha. So, I mean, this is oversimplified, but those three are related like that. So therefore, that yogi who achieved enlightenment through sleep, you see, they were merging the clear light of death as voidness, the clear light of sleep, and the clear light of waking trance, of meditation. Okay? So, so this happened, the point is, this happened in India. And this is where you could say the tantric thing is not some alternative thing where somebody, as people have thought, some horny monk, a bunch of horny monks who were tired of being celibate came up with a big rationalization for running out and having an orgy somewhere, which is how people have thought about it. And the Victorians, when they discovered deities in Tibet and even in a few sculptures left in ancient India, or little seals on little clay things, they were really freaked out, and they said, oh, this is so obscene and so disgusting and so horrible. And also some sort of fierce-looking template archetype deities who are looking a little ferocious, very Halloweenish. Even there's one pair of skeletons, male-female skeletons, who even though they're skeletons and they have no meat on their bones, they're still dancing and embracing each other as two skeletons who are famous deity in the tantric thing, indicating that the bliss is really in the bones. It's very fun, very Halloweenish. It is Halloween. Happy Halloween, by the way. I don't know if you guys are celebrating it. You don't have small kids, but luckily I don't either right now. They all grew up, and I don't have to take my grandchildren. That's one of the privileges of being a grandparent. Otherwise, you have to go out and you trick or treat and make sure nobody's giving them poison, cookies and whatever it is, which I did for years. Okay, so that's what. So this tantra thing, therefore, is a natural outgrowth of the Mahayana messianic idea. When you take the bodhisattva vow, you say, "I'm ready for 3 incalculable aeons of lifetimes, where I will evolve and evolve through practicing generosity, morality, and patience and tolerance, the 3 other regarding sort of ethical paramitas or transcendent virtues." And then I will, out of that, develop the body of Buddhahood. And of course, with the companion merit of creative effort, meditational concentration, and wisdom, realizing the nature of reality. But it'll take me 3 incalculable aeons of lifetimes. And they're ready for that. Bodhisattva is ready for it because they consider that if they don't do that, they're going to be here for incalculable aeons of lifetimes anyway. But they're still going to be in the samsaric thing of each person inside themselves, separate from everybody else, and it's your struggle versus the universe, which, according to the second noble truth, the cause of suffering is the cause of suffering. Because you never can overwhelm the universe, it constantly overwhelms you, and that overwhelming doesn't just end in you becoming nothing at death, you're then reborn and you go through it all over again. So that's the bodhisattva thing. Then, when the bodhisattva reaches a certain stage, if they're lucky and they encounter someone who knows this magical, let's say, or inner scientific, most advanced teaching, they come into the idea that in a subtle plane, not in meat space, but in a subtle space, in the case of that one guy in the dream state, in sleep and dream state, and in the case of Virupa, he's reciting this mantra millions of times, and he comes into a trance of Vajravarahi, and Vajravarahi, the diamond sow, as her name is, she's like Prajnaparamita in a sort of more erotic and more imminent and powerful form, who he sees. That's transcendent wisdom there, but seen as a person, actually, who blessed him and initiated him. Narapa also gets initiated that way. He's with Dilaban, he's going around, and at some point he meets the Vajra Yogini, as she's called, and he says, and she's a little scary. She's this bright red female deity holding a staff and a skull bowl and filled with demon blood and a thing like this. And he meets her and he says, "Oh, great, I want to meet you. I need to be initiated." He said, "Really? You really want to be initiated?" He said, "Yes, that's all I wanted." So then she became huge. He became like miniature. He then was drawn irresistibly by like a tractor beam into her mouth, swallowed by her. And then he went down her central channel, brain chakra, throat chakra, heart chakra, navel chakra, genital chakra. And then he was reborn out of her, having been initiated, but he was experiencing being inside the body of this being, this deity, supposedly, and which was a little bit scary. He was a little bit freaked about that. I think it's a nice Brahmin male guy, and suddenly he's inside the body of this like female goddess who's like a female Buddha. He was a little freaked about it, in short. But so they encounter like that, this form, supposedly. But then what is it that they think they're doing? And what they think they're doing is this. You can have a dream, and in your dream, you could die. Or you could be in a situation where you could only save a bunch of people by giving your own life, let's say. And you can do that in a dream, and then it's a dream, so there's no meat space wetware. There's no blood and gore, and you don't actually die and leave the body and then have to find a rebirth and then come back and do this like a lifetime. In that subtle state, you can go through the very giving up of the dream body and giving it away, and then achieving the evolutionary merit of being detached from yourself and giving yourself for the benefit of others, which is what the Bodhisattva does over 3 incalculable lifetimes, to become where then, like, remember Shakyamuni Buddha says, when he puts his hand on the earth as his witness, he tells the devil, I did all these great things for all these beings for innumerable, countless lifetimes, and that's how I get to be a Buddha. Remember, the devil asked him, like, how come you're being a Buddha and claiming you're going to save everybody? Who asked you? You know, like, what's your right to do that, and who's your witness? You know, because he had said to the devil, well, I know you got to be king of the devils by one tiny little piece of altruism in some previous life amongst the devils. So I did so many for every being, you know, so many lifetimes. And then the devil says, well, who could ever witness that? Therefore, you can just claim that, but you can't prove it. So then he touched the earth, and the earth goddess jumped out and says, oh, yeah, I was here. He did it on the earth, you know, so I know about it. And she testified for him. So, in other words, all those many lifetimes can be compressed in a non-meat space reality, in a subtle body reality of dying and being reborn, and dying, being reborn, and achieving transcendent virtues of giving oneself, being ethical and aware of just what other beings need, and being tolerant, accepting the injury of others without anger or hatred or resentment or vindictiveness or vengeance orientation. And this is done on the subtle plane endlessly. And therefore the evolutionary imprint of giving yourself in that way then brings one to the point of expanding one's sense of identification as Buddhahood is, as I've explained to you numerous times before, right? So that's the claim. Now, people ask, well, how do you know that there are any? Or does anybody do these things, you know? And I had to say, I don't know if you all saw it in the piazza, because I don't know quite how it all works, but in the piazza I answered that, and one doesn't know. And it could be just a complete delusion that they all have, and nobody's really doing anything, and nobody's really getting anywhere, and they're just sitting around and being deluded. That's very possible. But so many people over so many centuries fitted in with that, and so many of them think they did that. And then Tibet did this innovation, which is not the reincarnation innovation or rebirth incarnation. Everybody has rebirth and reincarnation according to their science, anyway. Because the mind continues when the body gives out, you know. But it's the idea of consciously reincarnating to do a specific mission somewhere, you know, in a certain culture and so on, which means that the person who's able to do that cannot possibly be an ordinary person. Because they have to have fully become conscious of their unconscious by the time they die, so that their choice of rebirth is not influenced by any sort of drive that they can't control, no sort of primal lust. Eros and Thanatos are not in control of them, but they are in control of their own Eros and Thanatos, if you will. If you know what I'm referring to in Freud, you know, the unconscious. Thanatos means death. That's the Greek god of death. So that means the aggressive element inside the unconscious, and then Eros is the polymorphously perverse erotic element, right? So all those tantric images, which I meant to show you today, but I'll try to do it, get the wire back and do it Thursday. All those images have to do with, in that subtle plane, inhabiting an embodiment that manifests those qualities, and then learning to navigate those energies, something like that, in a subtle plane, not in the meat space plane at all, ultimately. However, in order to be able to do that, for example, you all have dreams, we all have dreams, and normally in dreams, we just have things happen, and we're never aware of, you know, like the question they ask is, with what eyes do you see the visions that you see in a dream? Which eye sees it? Because your eyes are closed and you're asleep. But in fact, the part of brain that processes visual imagery is functioning. They have had fMRI studies of people doing REM dreaming, and the brain thinks that it's the body doing it. But then how many times in a dream have you become aware of your body and what kind of body you had in the dream? When you wake up and remember the dream, you sort of assume that just like I am in my waking body, that's what was happening in the dream. And in a way, the brain is reproducing that. But one of the tricks of learning to lucidly dream that Western researchers have discovered, I don't know of a Tibetan text that says that's a useful thing to do. Lucid dreaming is, but this particular thing of where you try to program yourself before you fall asleep, day after day after day, have to persistently do it. That whenever I have a dream next, if it is tonight or any night, then I want to look at my hands in the dream, or I want to look at my body and see what it's like. And programming that, then eventually one will do that, they say. And then when one does that, then one is in for maybe some surprises, like what does one's body look like in a dream? And then that's a way of triggering the possibility of what they call lucid dreaming, where you somehow connected with your consciousness stream of waking while dreaming without waking up. We all become lucid that we're dreaming in the quick process of waking up, right? And we sort of remember the dream, but then we forget it after a little while, right? I had a very interesting one last night, but I can't remember what it was. It was a Halloween dream, probably. Who knows? Okay? So this is the claim, therefore, that you accelerate all these aeons of evolution into a short space of time, because in this subtle plane of the dream-like state, or the bardo or between-like state, you can live and die many, many times without the mess and fuss. And you return to your own embodiment from those subtle plane states. And okay, so that's the claim. And I'm not saying that it's true. I don't know if it is, but I think it's a remarkable claim. And certainly people in the tradition think it's true, and very few claim anything about it. But it is a known thing. For example, one thing that is known is that people who've been sort of a humble monk or sitting around, when they die, some of them sit for even a week, even 2 weeks in some exceptional cases, or at least a few days, and there's no brain activity, and there's no breathing, and there's no pulse. And yet the body does not collapse and start to smell and become corrupt, which otherwise a corpse does rather quickly. I don't know if you've ever experienced being around a corpse, but they start to stink really quickly. And then at a certain point, after a few days, they sort of will slump over, and some fluids will come out of the nostrils, and then they have to be dealt with, cremation or zipped up in a body bag. The coroner comes and takes them away, because it's unsanitary, But there are many cases, even in any climate, that are documented, and I've seen a couple myself, which, although I didn't sit through days with them, but I've seen them at the sort of after so many days, with others having been there and telling me about it. And they're not being embalmed yet, and they're just sitting there still, and they died a week ago or something. I've seen one or two like that. And that indicates that, and that's called sitting in clear light. So it means somehow they are trying to show something to the people, that the mind has this power over the physical reality. And I think it's the only reason they would do that, because basically they're leaving and either going to another body or doing something else. Supposedly, at least they think, but their body sits like that. And either it's because they're having a delusional fantasy and it's so powerful that it stops the body from being corrupted, or they're really onto something with these inner yogas and inner sciences. That's the one thing. And the Dalai Lama, he has like a SWAT team of fMRI neuroscientists who have stashed somewhere in Mumbai like a portable fMRI and something. And then they're coming from Europe. If they hear somebody died and this is happening, they're supposed to fly to Mumbai, take another plane to the local airport near the monastic college where the people are, and then study the body, like what's going on in it, in a scientific way. And so far, no one's done it really fully, and he's very worried about it. But then he feels that he can't ask the old lamas to pre-schedule, and he's feeling maybe he should, but he's nervous, and he thinks maybe I couldn't, and maybe that's unethical. I shouldn't do that. And so, but obviously, he's hinting around one of them to say, "Okay, next week, have them show up, and I'll croak for them." So far that hasn't happened. They've done other studies of these yogis who do things like produce tremendous temperature, heat, melt icy sheets on their bodies, in wintertime in high mountains. That they've studied, Some guys from Harvard and so forth have studied that. The ability to create like very high temperature inside different parts of the body, what they call Tummo meditation. So there's some unusual things they have documented. Okay, so that's the Tantra. Oh yeah, then the third thing I wanted to show then, although this is not assigned until next week, now is it true, by the way, Iban, we don't meet on Tuesday because it's election day, is that correct?
Yes.
I think I have that in the syllabus, but then I was doubting it, but it's probably very important election. Not as important as next year, but it is important. So okay, so we only meet once next week. And this was a sign for that, but I wanted to jump ahead and read it. Because being still in India, this is a sign for next week, but I just wanted to read a few passages from it, what's called the creation stage. So then there's 4 different classes of Tantra, and many hundreds of Tantras. There's a famous thing of the great Atisha, who was a Bengal prince who became a great monk in India and visited Tibet in the 11th century. When he was a prince, he was already he was a Bengal prince in one of the Pala dynasty families, and he was already a great scholar and debater and a renowned sort of intellectual in his late 20s, but not a monk. And he had a dream where some Dakinis came to see him, and they said, "Oh, you're so great, you're a great expert, and you're a great, you know a lot of tantras and this and that, and you're really very interested in tantras, aren't you?" He says, "Yes." They said, "Well, would you like to see some tantras that maybe you haven't heard yet or haven't seen the text of them?" And he said, "Oh, yes, I would." And so then they came with a giant, like, steamer trunk, because this was in dream space, I guess, like a huge giant trunk. And they brought the trunk to him, and then they pulled off the lid, and he looked in the trunk, in the dream, and in the trunk there was like hundreds of texts, and he could only see title pages, and he'd never heard of any of them. So they were completely beyond his, like, what he knew about this or that tantra. So then they said, "See, there's quite a lot to learn in this." I said, "Wow, there sure is." And so then he said, "How can I learn about all this?" And they said to him, "Well, if you want to stop fooling around as a prince and an intellectual and go and become a mendicant, then maybe you might have it and go to the university as a mendicant, then maybe you can learn some of this." So then he became a monk at that age, and he became a great person. And that was him. So a great Atisha. So the self-creation. So there are 4 types of tantra, called ritual tantra, conduct tantra, yoga tantra, and unexcelled yoga tantra is the 4th kind. Usually there's other ways of categorizing, but the mainstream way is that. And then in unexcelled yoga tantra, there's father and mother tantras. And then some people think there's non-dual tantra, but some people, the majority opinion is that all of them are non-dual, but father has a certain emphasis and mother has another emphasis, and which I can talk about later. But anyway, in the unexcelled yoga one, which is considered most advanced, it is divided itself into 2 stages, which are called creation stage and perfection stage, or completion stage. And the creation stage is more or less a visualizational stage, where the mendicants, and very open to the practice by mendicants, where they can mobilize their ability to have one-pointedness of mind, and then they, instead of doing that, sort of dissolving everything in front of them, by this vipassana critical insight, where they discover emptiness and relativity, emptiness and relativity, which we talked about last week and in a number of ways in different times. Instead of that, they already have some taste of that anyway, and then what instead they do is they visualize like a pure land, the equivalent of a pure land. And it's very Indian, and you read in the Amitayus Dhyana Sutra and a little bit in Lotus Sutra and other things about these sort of visualizational things that are presented exoterically in the sutras. And here is like a systematic practice of that in what is called a mandala. And a mandala is not just a 2-dimensional, like a pattern, like Carl Jung thought it was, like a diagram, but which has a use, but it wasn't that. What those are like floor plans or footprints of an entire different universe, of the central palace of the entire different universe, the divine palace in an entire different universe. So instead, what is visualized is a holographic pattern of a palace, a superb architectural environment in an alternative universe, where then you come in your subtle mind through meditative stabilization, and you adopt even a different body in that, and then you are there as the Buddha in that universe, and that's what the creation stage is about. And you may even be there as many beings in the palace, maybe 32, for example. This one that is in the Practicing the Creation Stage section in the Essential Tibetan Buddhism, but it comes from an Indian text, which is the Guhya Samaja Tantra, and many texts that are commentaries on that Guhya Samaja Tantra. Guhya Samaja meaning esoteric communion. And so it begins with invoking the lineage of spiritual ancestors who are brought from sort of ahistorical notion of the presence of Buddha, who they call Vajradhara, but they associate that with Shakyamuni in the tradition. They don't consider this as some late thing, as Western scholars do, but they consider it as something that was there from the beginning, but was kept really esoteric for 1,000 years from the time of the Buddha, because the society wasn't ready for this. And so then down through the lineage of people who transmitted this one after another. And so that's how they always begin, all of those what I call sadhanas, or evocations, or visualizations, or performances even, I call them, symphonic performances, they list. And it's quite interesting, this one, and it relates to the Milarepa story, but I'll save that for later, about how Tibetan culture, more than Indian culture probably, and more than later Mongolian culture, and as much as later Mongolian culture, they achieved something which is really quite interesting and unique, in the sense that Tibetans have very little interest in their own ancestors. They don't really go, like if people think of themselves as having a certain blood. Racism is rooted in that kind of a transformation of egotism, where your lineage, your blood, even though people in the biology department tell there is no such thing as white blood, black blood, Jewish blood, whatever it is, there's no such thing. Everything comes from villages in the Congo or something, Lucy, according to their mythology, scientific materialist mythology, and then there's more genetic differentiation among 3 or 4 villages there than there are between a Chinese person and a Jew and a wasp. There's very little differentiation, anyway, genetically speaking. And that fits, of course, with the karma theory. But anyway, in the Tantra, there's this thing of where the ancestor worship, you could say, is transferred to a spiritual lineage. And you noticed in the Bodhisattva vow thing, in Shantideva's chapter, where he says, well, now I'm a child of the Buddha, because I'm in the Bodhisattva family and I can't disgrace the family. Did you notice that? And then Buddha's always telling, in the different sutras, he says, Kulaputra, which I just translate as noble son or noble child. But some people overdo it and say son of good family or child of good family. But because Kula means like family or tribe or clan, Kula does. But what they mean there is, child of the Buddha clan, in other words, rather than some blood lineage. You transfer that sense of lineage to a spiritual lineage, in other words, which karma in general does, the karma biological theory, but it's done very explicitly in these visualizations. Then there's what's called instantaneous self-creation. In a split second, I myself become the blue-black fury Vajra, with 3 faces, black, white, and red, 6 arms holding Vajra wheel and lotus in the right, and bell, jewel, and sword in the left. So your shoulder is sprouting into 3 arms on each side, and you have 3 faces. Embraced by touch Vajra, similar to myself. We are both in union, sitting up yogic union. And we are both adorned with 8 jeweled ornaments, our shoulders draped with heavenly shawls, our waists covered with divine silken robes. So instantaneous means just boom, one has a self-image of oneself as a being. And this is something now in the creation stage, it's just a thing one is visualizing. But the goal is, where in those sessions of meditation, for these people who are already trained in basic meditation, in compassion, in wisdom, in transcendence or detachment, detachment from lust and hate through renunciation and compassion, So they're already trained like that, and they have trained in meditation where they're able to have one-pointed concentration. They are actually interfering with the self-image, the biological or the physiological, neurological self-image that we have of ourselves. For example, everyone here has a self-image of themselves as having one face, two arms, two legs, and whatever trunk, organs, skeleton, right? You have an image of yourself in your brain like that, which is proven by phantom limb phenomenon. Shantideva refers to it where he says, I've learned to identify a pain as mine, and that's what makes it painful. Meaning that I am inhabiting this model, this neural model of my own neural system, and as being such a being, right? Like right now, I don't know how many arms I have, but I have a self-image of having like two shoulders with arms coming out of it, and being of my age, I have like slight pain in that shoulder, and that all fits in my model of myself, right? So then here one develops a long-term systematic cultivation of feeling there are three arms coming out of my shoulder, which is a rather complicated, different thing. And in a way, maybe you'd have to have a little bit different, more powerful chest and a certain thing if you visualize yourself like that, right? And then you visualize yourself as two bodies in union, and you have three faces. And so you're looking, each one has three eyes, so you're looking out with three eyes in two directions and looking straight ahead with three eyes in another direction. You have one central eye in the forehead of this particular one. Some of them don't, some of them do. So what you're doing is you're creating systematically a different neural image of yourself, and so that you have a feeling of yourself as this kind of different being, right? In theory, okay? And with a tremendous mental stabilization, you're actually therefore changing in a way the neural patterning inside your central nervous system by being able to shift your model of yourself into a different embodiment, okay? And you do it under both your ordinary one. You won't be able to do that if you didn't have some initial understanding of emptiness or voidness, meaning that the way you feel yourself has to do with how you construct yourself, with the model of yourself that you have, which you've developed by sort of growing up in culture and being a human being and blah, blah, blah. And that is something that you have constructed, actually. It isn't just sort of there concretely, automatically at all. And which you only know, you don't have the imagination to do that if you don't know the constructedness of whatever image you have of yourself or anything else. So that's why these are advanced practices, because only when you have these bases are you able to do this, supposedly. And so then you do that. Then there's all these things, and where you connect to what's called the inner sacrifice or inner offering, has to do with creating something where all the substances of the coarse body are placed and turned into nectar and elixir, which is a kind of rehearsal for turning your own meat space existence into something, holy and something Buddhistic, made of pure altruistic imagery. And then you take, there's all this refuge and different things, but then what I wanted to read, then there's a protection wheel, you create a new universe, and I wanted to read from this, which then begins on this. Page 222, for those of you who jump ahead, it's the next week's thing. There being no things, there is no meditator. There's no things, that's like the Heart Sutra, right? That means there's no intrinsically real things. Of course, there are things interactively with my concepts of the things, interactively with my mind's construction of the things as this or that thing. So, but that doesn't mean that doesn't exist, but no things means no things in themselves. There is no meditator. There's no meditator in myself. Nothing to meditate upon, and no meditation. Since things are without reality, meditation is not to be perceived. Since all animate and inanimate things are ultimately without reality, they have the nature of emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness, wherein meditated meditation and meditator are not perceived. So this is establishing the foundation of the mutability of everything, which therefore is more or less powerful in a person practicing, and depending on whether they've experienced things dissolving under vipassana insight, combined with one-pointed concentration, where they've seen things dissolve under analysis. From the actuality of emptiness in a split second in the center of the complete Vajra ground, that is, the complete Vajra ground means the clear light of the void, this plane of infinite energy that is that is this inconceivability of the infinite relativity, replete with fence, tent, canopy, and fire mountain, there is a white triangular reality source standing upright with an expansive top and a tapered base. Within its fine lower point in the center of a lotus, there is Hum Yam Hum, and from the blue-gray Yam becomes a blue bow-shaped wind mandala. That's pure energy. From the two Hums come two Vajras to adorn the two sides. Upon that Hum Ram Hum, from the red Ram, comes a red triangular fire mandala. So you have a bow-shaped plane of pure energy. Then you have fire on top of that in a triangle. Then you have white Ram, which is the water mandala, and then you have a square golden Lam, which is the earth mandala. And then these transform. Those four elements are in fact the four goddesses of the mandala, which are Lochana, Mamaki, Pandaravasini, and Samayatara. And they merge. From the merging of the four mandalas, there arises, and this here mandala has a different meaning, it just means a sphere of energy. There arises a double Vajra, like a Vajra cross, on which manifests a white broom radiating light rays of clouds of Buddhas, from which arises the square four-doored divine palace. So now you're visualizing a hologram, exquisite palace made of pure jewelry. It isn't like concrete walls with jewels encrusted on them. It's all jewels. And these are giant slabs of jewels which don't exist on Earth, but they're like pure jewel energy. And then I will skip a little bit and say its walls have 5 layers from the outside in: white, yellow, red, green, and blue. Near the top of the wall is a red jewel frieze adorned with jeweled squares and triangles. Its plate is adorned by 4 golden colonnades. Over that protrude rafters shaped like crocodile heads, from whose mouths hang pearl nets and half nets, and little bells hang on that. Outside that, jeweled pendants hang from the edge of the roof. Above that is a balustrade in the shape of half lotus petals. It is beautified by 8 banners and 8 victory standards which stand in golden vases on the roof. 4 royal umbrellas adorn the 4 outer corners. At the foot of the outer wall there is a red ledge on which dance offering goddesses in various postures and colors, worshipping and making offerings. And it goes on like this. And you're going to read that yourself, so I don't need to read much more. All I'm saying is you recognize in this the kind of imagery that you saw in the Amitabha Pure Land Paradise, or in the Lotus Sutra, the stupa of the Prabhutaratna Buddha, the profusion of jewels Buddha, or in the Flower Ornament Sutra and the extraordinary visualizations that I think I read you a page or two from, of where the Buddha is under the tree when he first attains enlightenment and everything turns into this exquisite, like perfect place, or even tiny taste of it in the Vimalakirti when the Buddha puts his toe on the ground and everybody perceives themselves sitting in a jewel lotus is all it says. But what it means is everybody perceives themselves in a place which is ideal for them to manifest their own highest potential, is what it means. And according to their own evolutionary ability to open themselves to channeling the infinite energy potential of the universe. You could say something like that. You know, so here is a systematic training in visualizing this kind of thing at this stage, so that, you know, if you develop success in the creation stage practice, then you can shift from your notion of an ordinary reality where you consider that you are in a universe where everything is like a pure land. It's perfect for you to undergo whatever kind of transformation is needed for the benefit of beings, and you yourself are in total bliss. And actually you become 32 different beings in this building, which it details in great detail, which is kind of tiresome to read actually. And it's only a kind of a script. It's a script, and which there are huge commentaries on, enormous complicated commentaries. But this script is how to shift your awareness into feeling completely self-confident, completely secure, where you can completely open your heart in any kind of sensitivity without fear of anything coming at you, which we always have in a culture. Like, you know, there's like a pure land on earth in the Indian and Tibetan mysticism called Shambhala, which is where Shangri-La comes from. You know the idea of Shangri-La, it's a mispronunciation of Shambhala. And this is supposedly like up in the North Pole, nobody knows where it is, but it's supposedly on earth. And some lamas have said they visited there, but very few. And sort of there's a force field around, no one can see it, but it relates a little bit to Indian and Tibetan apocalypticism. And having very little merit, I never had any dream or vision about it myself, except I had one funny dream that I was on a horse in Central Asia, and this is a weird dream, and I had fallen off and I was unconscious. So I was dreaming I was in Central Asia, and I fell off a horse and I was unconscious and lying like this, but I was regaining consciousness in a ditch, and the horse was like up there, my horse was standing there. And then I heard, as I was waking up, 4 or 5 horsemen around my horse, on their horses, I assumed, talking about my body, which was asleep in the ditch. So then I feigned still being unconscious because I didn't know they were bandits or robbers or killers or anything. And I was lying there pretending still to be unconscious, but I was listening to them talking. And of course, I was trying to figure out what language were they speaking. It wasn't Chinese. I had studied. It wasn't Japanese. It wasn't Mongolian. It wasn't Tibetan. It wasn't Sanskrit. I couldn't figure out what they were saying, and it was a really weird language. It wasn't like any language I'd ever heard. And I was like, what are they saying? They didn't seem too menacing. I wasn't too scared after a while, but I still didn't want to sit up because I didn't know what they would do. And then they sort of decided that I wasn't dead or anything, and I would eventually wake, and my horse was waiting there. So then they were starting to go away, and just when they did, I suddenly clicked in my mind, in a dream, that they were speaking a language spoken by people who had no fear of their throat ever being cut. They had absolutely no fear of their throat being cut. So there wasn't what you might call the neural armoring of a normal human being on this planet so far, the last few thousand years, where there is an issue about somebody might sneak up behind you and cut your throat. Or a tiger might leap on you, or like a bulldog might grab you, we have a little, and so there's like an armor in our throat. Our throat is not completely, maybe some saxophone players managed to blow it away, the great saxophone players, but otherwise we do have this kind of feeling of tension in here, And I realized this language, whatever it was spoken by people who had no such fear. So then I was thinking in the dream, oh, they must be from Shambhala. And I was like, I was going to jump up and try and tell them to wait, I want to see you. And then, of course, I woke up. And then, of course, it was the end of the dream. So I never got to see a single person. I don't know, and of course, it was just a complete fantasy. That's as close as I ever got to the magical country. Show the professors how, poor karma they have, But, or else it's just another delusion, It could all be a delusion. We have to admit that it all could be delusory. But what it is the claims that they have and the culture that they have and what they lived on all this time and what they just demilitarized their country about by choosing to live in a certain vulnerable and open-hearted way, basically, and even in a fairly harsh physical environment. And even then convinced the Mongolians, who had the most huge, vicious empire you can imagine, it's something going on, whatever it is. The delusion is really strong, something going on. And now, they have lost their country and they're all wandering. Some of them are wandering in exile, and those who are there are not allowed to practice their own education and culture. And yet, it's become of global interest to people. They have people all over the place. Not all of them so great, and some of them idiots, but they're all over the place. So they're somehow radiating something from this culture, which is interesting. And I leave you with the last one. Om Shunyata Jnana Vajra Svabhavatma Koham. That mantra is the mantra where in the performance, in the sadhana, that is the key mantra about conversion of death into the Buddha Dharmakaya. And it's very paradoxical in its explanation. It says, Atma Koham means I have the soul maker. I am the soul maker, you could say, Atma Ko. The ka part means the maker of something. So Atma Ko means soul maker. So I am the soul maker with the intrinsic nature of the diamond or the vajra, whatever, that's that infinite clear light plane of energy. Of the jnana means the intuitive knowledge of emptiness. So it's really, and then Om is just invocation. So Om Shunyata Jnana Vajra Svabhavatma Koham. So how can the knowledge of emptiness, which would seem to be the intuitive knowledge of emptiness, would seem to be a kind of dissolving into pure space, right? But how can that be Vajra? That is to say, infinite energy or diamond, unbreakable diamond. And then the reality of that is what I make my soul into, sort of thing. That's a really interesting mantra. Okay, take it easy. See you on Thursday. And I hope I will get a wire. I need a Mac wire that fits here. I left it in my home in the Catskills.